Castleguard, rising over 10,000 feet through the tangled ice fields of Banff National Park in Alberta. Most parties who take the 8 hours to ski across 15 miles of mountain tundra and glacier come here for the view. A few more intrepid men come to challenge Castleguard, to explore its craggy face and edge their way to its summit. These men are yet another breed. They too will challenge the mountain, not to climb up it, but to climb into it. This will be their third attempt. Entrance, hard enough to find in summer, is almost completely obscured by the winter landscape. 2 earlier summer expeditions into the cave were frustrated by natural hazards and lack of proper equipment. But this time, the cavers have come prepared, with enough food and gear for an extended push. And if they're right, they'll need it, because Castleguard could well be the longest cave yet discovered in Canada, and the most dangerous. The team leader is Derek Ford, 39, a specialist in cavern genesis and professor of geography at McMaster University some 2,000 miles away.
Caving is a great sport. I'm a professional geographer because I fell in love with climbing mountains and exploring caves and decided to turn it into a profession if I could, and was lucky enough to do so.
Titch Morris is a master carpenter by trade. He's the team cook by default.
I first started climbing, but I found that caving was a lot more interesting. Well, with climbing, you can pick your route out and study it from a safe position and then go ahead and climb it. Whereas underground, you find your handholds and your footholds as you get to them.
Mike Goodchild, the youngest member of the team. He's been caving since he was 12, when he tackled the one in his backyard.
Cavers are lunatics. Take a look at this lot. Here's Charlie Brown. He's a squeeze freak. He gets a big kick out of finding the smallest and tightest place in the cave. I guess that's because he's the smallest. He stands the best chance. Pete Thompson, he's a climbing freak. He likes to find a piece of rock that he can climb up and fall off. Then there are the vertical freaks, the people who like to find a great pit in a cave and climb up and down it on ropes, yo-yo up and down. But I guess if you look at this lot in general, they're a pretty represented bunch.
Though no one would ever accuse cavers of being overly modest, this so-called representative collection is probably one of the most seasoned caving teams in the world, with an average of over 17 years' experience each. And it was because of their unique qualifications that they were especially invited by Parks Canada to attempt to explore Castleguard, to survey its length and to evaluate its potential scientific significance. Because Castleguard extends under glaciers and an ice field, it offers an excellent opportunity to study the last ice age in the Rocky Mountains. With this expedition, Canadians will be able to see part of a national park that is too fragile and too dangerous for them to visit in person. Caving is no sport for weekend hikers. It's a dangerous business. Anyone wanting to explore caves in a national park should first contact a park warden. Though the entrance to Castleguard has been known locally for many years, serious exploration began only a few years ago when Michael Goodchild led a reconnaissance expedition. cave looked promising, but without full equipment, they were able to explore only the first 470 feet. Like the casually curious before them, they were stopped here, a 30-foot drop, straight down. Impossible to negotiate without ropes or ladders. Before the descent, Titch secures himself to a 2,000-pound test safety line. There are risks enough in this kind of work, so you take precautions where you can.
Caving to me has got a lot of the pioneer spirit in it. That feeling of going into an area where nobody else has ever been before. It's just plain true exploration. It's never knowing what's there and how the problems come up. If you find a hole, a shaft going down it, you never know how deep it is, and there's always a very tense moment when you set off over the edge of it to explore, treading new ground. And it's very challenging mentally and physically. You've got to be really up to it and on top of it. And I think in the long run you tend to know yourself a lot more. You accept a few challenges each day, but it feels really great to be at your limits, but to know that you're still in control. I can't go too long without pushing myself a little bit.
At the bottom of the 30, the cave takes on a new personality. A quarter-mile of ice crawls where ice bubbles like jewels trapped in a crystal sea ornament a surrealistic underground world. A cold, strong wind blows through Castleguard, scalloping the ice into a frozen tapestry. It was this wind blowing into the entrance of the cave that first attracted the team. Strong winds generally indicate an extensive cavern system, and one that might have a second entrance.
The main reason that we're looking for a second entrance is the wind that blows through it. The wind has to go somewhere. There must be another entrance, whether or not it's accessible or whether or not it's big enough to explore, we just don't know. In places where there are constrictions around the ice crawls, it's strong enough to blow at your light. It blows dust through the cave, which you can taste, really, and certainly feel it. It makes being around in wet clothing quite uncomfortable because it's cold and wet.
After 30 minutes of frozen crawling, the ice dissipates, revealing a typical breakdown passage where the outside winter air has frozen and shattered the rock walls. The multiple layers of clothing worn by the team to protect them from the cold are a poor defense against the jagged rock floor. Almost half a mile from the surface, the winter temperature rises slightly, just enough to thaw the ice. Though the pool is only 3 feet deep, its near freezing waters are enough to try to climb around it. A second pool doesn't offer the same luxury. The only way is straight through. Generally, cavers prefer to make summer pushes when inside temperatures aren't so severe. But Castleguard isn't that easy, as Pete Thompson discovered on the second expedition.
We knew from the beginning that the cave flooded, but we didn't really know under what conditions. Unfortunately, we found out firsthand, Mike Boon and myself. So it was in summer, and where you have nice ice crawls now, there was 3 to 5 feet of water in the passage. And it was at that point that I started to get worried, because I heard this running water. So we just kept on wading until the water kept getting deeper, until eventually it just met the roof, and we realized that the cave was flooded and there was no way out. So we found the most comfortable spot we could on a sandy floor, and we scooped out a small hollow and built it up around with rocks to try and conserve a bit of heat, and then sort of snuggle down to it and snuggle up to each other and try to keep warm as best we could. We were extremely worried. Total provisions, as I remember, were 1 chocolate bar and 1 can of tuna. Naturally, we had no idea how long the flood would last, and mentally gave myself around about 4 or 5 days, after which I knew we'd stand very little chance of surviving. But then, after about 5 hours, suddenly hit us that the duck was open because the draft started again and we got very cold. But by that time our supplies of carbide were so low that we wouldn't have got out of the cave. So we just sat and waited for the team on the surface to come in because we knew they'd come in to have a look what had happened to us.
Just 10 minutes after the escape, the floodwaters closed in again, this time sealing off the entrance for 18 days. Castleguard had been lenient, but she had given her warning. Despite the discomfort, further expeditions would have to be made in winter.
Almost the worst of the crawls over. Okay, let's get going and warm up.
Beyond the crawls and pools lies a half-mile of relatively easy passage, a respite from the constant crawling and the last stretch of known cave.
Easy passages can be quite deceiving. They tend to lull you into a false sense of security, and it's quite tempting to drop your guard. It's always dangerous to get overconfident. Your light only lets you see about 15 feet ahead, and then the terrain can change pretty suddenly.
And it does. Like a trap set for unwary prey, the passage ends abruptly in an 80-foot vertical shaft, 1.25 miles from the surface, and the farthest point reached by the second expedition. To a caver, finding new territory is like no other experience in the world. Charlie Brown will be the first man ever to descend into the 80.
I guess there's just nothing comparable to finding large passages or extensions of known caves that no one's seen before. It's a fantastic rush. I think it's probably one of the finest pleasures of caving is to be the first person to see something that's really beautiful.
Once over the sloping, loose gravel lip of the shaft, the climber is on his own, out of sight from the rest of the team. Facing the rock wall for most of the climb, he can't see more than 5 feet below. Beyond that, he descends into blackness. "9:15 p.m. 3 hours and 45 minutes from the surface, Titch is the last man down the shaft. On the descent, he notices a large lead about 15 feet from the floor of the pit. It could be a way on. Becoming a human pendulum, he tries to reach the lead by swinging from the ladder.
I think he's coming down 3 times.
But it is too far. The only way will be a straight climb from the bottom.
Slipways up hill.
Yes.
Parts of the cave.
Just touch breathe in.
It's a bad piece, that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was cold as well, eh?
Might make it. Mine is a bit close on the overhang, yeah? Give it a try. Okay, I go.
30 minutes after disappearing into the hole, Titch is back at the top of the 80. His lead is a blind, nothing more than an awkward bypass to the shaft. Meanwhile, Peter has found another lead, smaller but more promising. A tiny squeezeway, almost hidden, right at the floor of the pit. If the wind is any indication, the squeeze is the lead to follow. After 40 feet, the squeeze opens out into a long, straight passage, long enough to justify a return to the surface for provisions and a fresh start in the morning. It looks like Castleguard may go after all. Even for confirmed cavers, mysterious Castleguard is not as beckoning as the majestic beauty of the Rockies in morning sun.
One thing that strikes you is how incredibly blue it is, because everything you see in the cave is either brown or grey. And so you get a real lack of blue, which really strikes you when you come out into the daylight.
But despite its beauty and its warmth, the sun rises far too soon for men who have spent 8 hours crawling over slippery ice and jagged rock.
Come on, you guys, time to get up.
Yeah, there's no evidence.
The thought of leaving crisp mountain air for another push into the damp and lightless cave makes for a slow start, and diversions are not difficult to find. After equipment check, the team leaves the 5 o'clock sun to the surface world. This time, to increase their range, they will take their cap with them. But the heavy equipment will make for awkward climbing.
The main problems of underground camping are logistics. You've got to get all of the things that you need, light, food, warm or dry clothing, to wherever you want to camp. And in some places that can be quite a monumental undertaking.
4 hours and 15 minutes after starting, the team is back at the bottom of the 80. Already, the heavy camping gear has taken its toll in time and energy. Castleguard is a grudging cave. She doesn't welcome intruders. But her main deterrent is not the discomfort or even the danger. Her most powerful weapon lies deep within the heart of man himself: fear.
I'm finding that as I get older that claustrophobia is getting more and more of a grip on me in caves. I don't think that I shall ever be able again to go through the kind of very, very constricted squeeze in which you are encased or entombed in a rock tube. I shall not be able to take one of those again.
When you go through the squeeze at the bottom of the 80, you feel you're acting like a cork because all the wind in the cave is being channeled through there. And when you're in there, the wind stops completely. So that when you come out, you get the impression there's going to be a great rush of air and maybe a little pop.
In mute testimony to the turbulent wind, a single stalactite has become a giant corkscrew through the centuries. Beyond the squeeze lies the subway, a uniform 15 feet in diameter, 1/4 mile long, and straight as a die.
The great caves of the world, such as Castleguard, are created by underground water dissolving limestone rock. It can form one of two basic types of cave. The subway is an excellent example of one of these types that we call the phreatic. At the time that the passage developed, it was completely full of water under high pressure, which dissolved the floor, walls, and ceiling simultaneously outwards to create the shape that you can see. It's really a ruddy great gun barrel.
A stream, the echo of a once mighty underground river, has formed a small, muddy trench at the floor of the subway, converting what could be an easy passage into a 1/4 mile of ankle-wrenching hopscotch. Five and a half hours and 1.5 miles from the surface, Castleguard again changes radically. Beyond a cleaved slab marking the end of the subway, a huge fissure, some 60 feet high, stretches into the blackness.
The fissure is a very good example of the other basic type of solution cave shape, one that we call vadose. Here the water did not fill all of the passage, it merely flowed as a river along the floor, so it was able only to dissolve the floor, and it has dissolved it downwards in a deep trench, creating an underground canyon.
I like the challenge of the fissures. It's very challenging from the point of view that you're choosing the right way of tackling the various problems, the climbs and the slippery rocks. It's one continuous challenge from start to finish.
You have to concentrate all the time. There's no slacking off. You've got to make sure that your feet go in the right place all the time. You've got to watch your handholds, your footholds. And there's always this worry about a slip. And if you do have a slip, and it's down the rift and probably an accident.
If someone were injured, I'm of the opinion that it would be almost impossible to get them out without causing them further injuries. So many possible places where he can be dropped, and you would tax a rescue team so much that the dangers of another accident would be very high. And I'd be inclined to try to set up a supply team to bring the injured man food and sleeping bag and whatever medical care we could get to him, and try to let him mend by himself. But then again, if it were a really bad injury, I would give him a very small chance of getting out alive.
All right, Pete? Yeah. Okay.
8.5 hours into the cave, the fissure shows no sign of letting up. Time is becoming a problem now, and as mind and body begin to weary, each step becomes more dangerous, and the threat of an accident more real.
If we can get up this ladder.
Go up to the right, it's easiest.
Well, a pack on it, isn't it?
Near the roof of the fissure, an eroded stalagmite provides a welcome rest stop. The small piece of flat ground is a haven for aching muscles and burning lungs.
Take a break.
Water still here?
Not much of it. Yeah, that's a lovely piece.
Beautiful.
Why, like stuff up there which cut across the laminate.
Time to shut out the pressures of the climb with a moment's sleep. Time for recharging the carbide lamps with fresh cave water.
It's too much.
Time for scientific evaluation. For the cave, time is immaterial. The endless process of formation and destruction goes on as it always has. This skeleton of a stalagmite, eaten away by the same dripping water that formed it over 150,000 years ago, represents only a moment in the life of the cave. But for the men, time is becoming all-important. They cannot afford to stop for too long. In the damp cold of the cave, strained leg muscles can easily seize up, and a suitable campsite must be found soon. The rest is welcome, but the minutes are too precious.
Oh, that was a mean thing to do.
That was a nice sleep in your
Fatigue is a very serious problem in caves. When you're tired, you tend to make mistakes. You tend to misjudge footholds or slip. Then those sorts of mistakes can be quite serious.
Eventually, you're trying to cope with sheer physical fatigue. And then, after a while, you start to get nagging doubts as to how much reserves of strength you have and whether you're going to be able to get out of the cave okay. And if you're not careful, these tend to grow until you find yourself, you're talking yourself out of going any further. You start to think about an accident, and although you might be faced with a perfectly reasonable climb, you tend to stand and these doubts start to creep, what if I should fall off this climb and such. And it becomes a bit of a battle to keep going, and it's a problem a lot of people just never overcome. They always have a psychological limit in a cave rather than a physical limit. Well, I guess this is what makes cavers.
Finally, 11.5 hours from the surface, the fissure comes to an end. It has gone on an incredible 1.25 miles and taken 6 hours to climb. Once again, Castleguard has opened out, as if to stretch from its own confinement. Beyond, directly beneath the summit of the mountain, lies a vast grotto full of weird and alien forms.
One of the distinctive things about the stalactites in this cave are the wind flags on them, where you get a stalactite which is growing straight down and then suddenly takes off horizontally for maybe an inch or so. And that appears to be due to the fact there's a very strong wind which is carrying the growth with it. The cave pearls in the cave are tremendously impressive. This is one of the finest sources of cave pearls I've seen anywhere. They seem to form because there are grains of sand in the pool which are being agitated by water falling into the pool, and slowly build up a layer upon layer of calcite. Very much like, more like the way an oyster forms a pearl in its own shell.
even the strange beauty of the grotto poses problems for the exhausted men. The slightest jar could destroy these delicate creations of thousands of years. And so the beauty itself becomes yet another obstacle. At this point, over 3 miles from the entrance, Castleguard is already the longest known cave in Canada, and still no place to camp. After 13.5 hours of ceaseless climbing, 3.5 miles from the surface, Castleguard relents. Without a word between them, the men know that this is what they've been looking for, a chamber large enough for a camp.
Camping underground is a problem in that most of your kit has been dragged a long way and it's damp, you're wet and cold, and the sleeping bag's damp and moist and there's grit in the bag and you're cold in general. But after 13 hours of continuous caving with a pack on your back, it's somewhere nice to creep into. It's somewhere that you can stop, somewhere that you can cook up, somewhere that you can lay out a sleeping bag and creep into and get warm again.
At 37 degrees Fahrenheit, this is the warmest part of the cave. Hammocks and air mattresses help to insulate from the cold, damp floor, but even so, it is necessary to sleep fully clothed. Inside, the cave is perpetual night. But on the surface, the morning sun has been burning for nearly 2 hours. Hopes for Castleguard have been borne out. Its route has taken the cavers almost straight into the mountain, beyond the tree line, under its gradually steepening slopes, beneath the windy summit that other men strive to climb, and farther, directly below the Rockies' greatest ice field. After 2 years of planning and 3 attempts, here, 3.5 miles into the mountain, under 1,500 feet of rock and 300 feet of ice, 5 men sleep in total blackness. "6 p.m. on the 3rd day. Morning is sounded by the striking of 5 flints to light the carbide lamps. The team will now split into 2 groups. While Peter, Titch, and Charlie follow the wind to try to push to the limits of the cave, Derek and Mike will stay behind to gather as much scientific data as possible.
A cave means a great deal to you if you're in on the early stages of exploration, but I view it from the point of view of a specialist in cavern genesis. It is a magnificent system. It is the most massive bedded limestone I've ever seen anywhere in the world. I've seen more than 800 caves around the world, and this one contains some of the cleanest and purest forms and lines that I've seen in any cave location.
Over 1,000 feet beneath the ice fields, removed from the effects of surface weathering and glacial action, evidence of local climates during the past several hundred millennia remain almost completely undisturbed.
This cave is potentially most important as a laboratory in which we can study much of the character of the last ice age in the Rocky Mountains. Because more than any other cave in the world, this one gets under bloody great glaciers and right out under great ice field. There's a close association of cave and a remnant of the last ice age. By continuing our isotope work on the stalactites and stalagmites of the cave, we hope to be able to determine quite a lot about the climate of the ice field that lies above the cave during the past 250,000 years or so. The thing is of profound geological interest because of the great simplicity of its architecture, and it is an outstandingly good cave prehistory book.
Hours into the third day, Derek and Mike settle in to wait for the return of the push team.
Hi, pleased to see you. Are we going to get worried? All okay?
Yeah. Sorry I was so late.
Oh, good.
Yeah, took a bit longer than we expected.
About 15 hours.
Yeah.
Good push. How'd you make out?
Oh, pretty well. Believe it or not, ends in ice.
Fantastic.
Peter and I have both seen many different kinds of ice in caves in the Rocky Mountains. This particular ice is very coarse and irregularly crystalline. It leaves us in no doubt that it's glacier ice, that the main cave passage has run out into the base of the Columbia ice field, that there's approximately 1,100 feet of glacier overhead. No other cave in the world finishes like this one. It's a unique ending. But yet Castleguard hasn't finished, you see, because there's that wind that blows all the way up through the cave. The bloody wind's got to go somewhere. We don't know where. We must try to find out.
For 70 hours, Castleguard's 7 miles have tolerated the intrusion. Having yielded some of her secrets and kept others, she will resume her timeless sleep. But the men will return. That elusive wind has to go somewhere.